So this is about how a UU church is helping to alleviate climate change. First, some introductions. Ian.
Hello, Ian Shanklin. I am presently a member of the board. Oh, gotta eat it. Presently member of the board and again, lover of trees. Tyler's waving at me, but background in design, landscape architecture. So that's why I am teamed up with Mark here, who is the expert.
I'm Mark Loskatov. I'm president-elect of the Board of Trustees. Energy efficiency nerd. Thank you. Let's see, what's next on the slides? Okay. I am a mechanical engineer, and for 20 years I designed equipment for automating factories. That was my Caterpillar phase. And then in 2009 I started a business doing my hobby, which is energy efficiency testing and consulting. I also like to do upgrades on my own house, so this is one of them. And I've upgraded the insulation in almost every surface of the exterior of my house. Ian.
So, of course, we're here about green building and part of the green team, looking to think about what we can do as a church, and that's one of the big things. And so, these next few slides, hopefully, you'll enjoy. But again, so we know 1918 church was built, and then following World War II, the addition, the wing was added. So again, a little over 100 years, how much has changed? Well, we know that fashionable clothing has always been popular, so, people still dress like this, right? We still dress our children like this for Christmas, and we still all celebrate Christmas, right? As a United States, so not much has really changed since 1918, right? We have mask mandates for pandemics, and we have everyone just, having no problem with masks. This is buzzing. We still drive cars, right? Nothing's changed there, correct? And, electronic mail. Still the same thing, right? And this is actually, I found this is actually 1918. This was a telegram from my grandmother, so.
Wow.
And of course, talk about sourcing local food, our witches are still, sourcing locally. But again, seriously, what can we do in terms of helping, with climate change and climate warming when we're talking about a church here? And that's one of the things that we want to talk about. And as Mark just showed some of the images of his house, this is an old building. If we were going to build this building today, this is not how we would build this building. But because we have this old building, right there we've got the embodied energy, and so we can make this building a little more efficient, and that's one of the things we want to talk about. This is one of the ones that I've always liked, Renee Dubois, and I think everyone knows this one about Think Locally, Act Locally. And we can talk about all the things that are happening in the world. There's not really a lot we can do in the big picture, but on a small scale, that's where we can make a big difference. I was going to show a lot of things about how many vehicle miles Americans drive, how many more people there are, how much more energy we use per person than we did even in 1918. We talked a little bit about this with your electrical panel. 1918, if you even had electricity in your house, you had a 30 amp box, and now we're talking standard 200 amp box, and again, that's, how much energy we can use at once. Not necessarily that we're using more, but when you look at the figures, we are using more. So how can we do that? And again, when you look at that in terms of our own seventh principle, we find a connection there. So back to Mark.
So as I said before, we all know the weather is getting weird. We've had blizzard warnings in Los Angeles, wintertime tornadoes, increasing strength and frequency of hurricanes, wildfires. We've which are caused by, a combination of both changes in management, maybe some unwise management of forest lands, and climate change and extreme drought in the western United States. The Colorado River is not as mighty as it once was. Lake Mead became in danger of not being able to produce hydroelectric power recently because of low water levels. The flooding in Pakistan was described as a monsoon on steroids, and the water from, I'm not sure when that was, last fall, still has not fully receded. Ian.
So, again, Mark could probably talk more on the specific details in terms of the, what the temperatures are, but we know that only a slight change in temperature makes a big difference for how everything grows. I mean, I grew up in North Carolina, and kid you not, people are growing bananas in their yards year-round in the Piedmont now, and that's unheard of. We have alligators and water moccasins that have moved up where they were only along the coastal plain, now going far into the Piedmont, which is again a semi-tropical, subtropical, group of animals. Things are changing, and so we know that. I mean, we know here, even in Omaha, I mean, just since we first moved to Omaha about 14 years ago, the winters are not as cold as they were before. I mean, today, was it supposed to be 60 degrees? I mean, it is, early March, but still, it seems like when we first moved here, that was pretty rare. And we look at this, and we look at the climate change, and then we look at the population curve, and I think that's one of the ones that, again, whether you want to make that connection or not, I think it's inevitable to see that, where 1804 is when worldwide we hit a population of 1 billion, and then it was 1927 was 2 billion, and then about 1960 is when we really started seeing a lot of the massive changes in terms of just our natural world, really making that, and it's just, it's exploded since.
So this little graph here starts on my birth date, 1960, and in the meantime, atmospheric carbon dioxide has increased by 20%. So it's kind of the story of my life. So what is a church to do? Our church is a place where we project our most deeply held values, and so we need to decide what we're going to do as a church and what we can do.
So getting back to the concept of embodied energy, this was actually one that the National Trust for Historic Preservation put out, and I believe it was 1980. It takes, it takes energy to build a new building, but it saves energy to preserve one. There's a lot of truth in that when you actually look at the embodied energy, how much energy it takes to fire a brick, and that's again, especially these days and historically, I mean, those are greenhouse emitting gases that you're using, to fire those bricks to make glass. Steel, yeah, exactly. Steel and concrete, especially, those are really big ones. Now, they're good materials and they last. And again, that's another reason why we have this building in place. As we said before, probably wouldn't build it this same way if we were doing it now. But in 1918, energy that was not, high on the list at the time of, needing to worry about conservation. But there's a lot of things that we can do to improve this building. And this is, again, not thinking about the Amish barn raising as a metaphor, but actually thinking about this in reality. This is one of the most fascinating things is, the documentaries. I've never seen one of these in real life, but documentaries I've seen on this where in 1 to 2 days, the entire community raises the barn and it's done. I mean, there may be a few little things, odds and ends here, but, when everyone pitches in, many hands make, light lifting. And that's kind of what we're talking about here in terms of what can we do at this church and in this sanctuary so that we are in fact living those principles and really trying to do our part and trying to look at, a reduced, and I ideally, and Mark can talk more on this, but ideally, carbon neutral, but definitely a reduced load, because, we're sitting here, it's not super cold out, but it is chilly, but we're all sitting here comfortably, so how do we make that more efficiently, run and grow more efficiently so we don't use it? And again, in an Amish barn raising, everyone has their particular role. You have a team that lifts, you have a team that nails, and then on, you have another team that props up, and then one by one, everyone knows their position, and whether they know it or not, they follow the lead, and everyone gets together. So this is one, the Interfaith Power and Light, which is an organization along with the Cool Congregations. This is one in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and they have undergone a goal of looking for zero carbon emissions in their church. Now, by 2030, yeah, so very quickly. And that was one of the things, so we attended a webinar on this. And, one thing that you will notice is they have a more modern building. So to me, it was immediately surprising that, for it being as new of a building, that there weren't more. But that said, also, it's a newer building, so it's a little easier. Ours is a historic building, so we have to think about this. But one of the most important pieces that their green team lead talked about was making sure that they had a defined plan. And without a plan, you can want to do everything you want, but you're not actually going to necessarily accomplish it. And so in this particular case, they had a plan, and they said, in fact, when we go forward here, you can kind of see here, these are the different categories, and I'm not going to read all these off to you, but again, the first one is the planning and establishing baselines and benchmarks. But then they have efficiency to the heating system, efficiency improvements to other mechanical systems, solar panels, and Mark can talk a little bit about this, but one of the things that's really interesting is they did not purchase the solar panels outright, but they leased them. And so there's a lot of different ways once you get into the kind of the nuts and bolts here of how you can do this. Window treatments, and in fact, that's one of the big ones that I'm going to encourage every single one of you as you leave, especially if you leave out the side door here, just look up at our windows and notice the gap between the top window and the bottom window, where you can actually see into the sanctuary. And then think to yourself, if this was your house, in the middle of the winter, would you leave your window slightly ajar so there was a little crack? I don't think so. And so when we think about this and we think about how high that ceiling is and how much heat it takes to make that a comfortable space, what can we do to those windows so that, again, we respect the historic window, but we also keep that draft out and keep the energy in. But just to give you an idea, so this is solar panels here that they had on the roof, and this is one of the nice things too with solar panel technology these days, is that the incident angle for which you have to have your panel can now be very, very low. It used to be that you had to figure out what latitude you were at, so we're at about 42 degrees north of the equator here, and so that's about the angle that you wanted your solar panel so that you had that, lined up with the sun. These days, the individual panel matrix can be at a much lower angle. I think it's only a 5-degree angle, and can still get the same efficiency from the solar. Again, we're not the builder being in the Midwest, but again, living our principles, anything helps. Same kind of thing with wind. But then you'll notice here too, and this is one, again, like Mark just showed you about the insulation. This was in insulating the interior. And that's one of the things that our church is very deficient on, is insulation. But these are, again, simple things, and this is part of their plan, and so this is one of the things that we would like to do with this church. And then I'm going to pass it back to you.
Yeah, Oliver wants us to retire that one.
Okay.
So this slide here is a report about the performance of People's Church of Kalamazoo in their efforts over 3 years. So they had their energy audit done in 2017, and they benchmarked their congregation's use of energy and emissions of carbon dioxide, I think in 2018, got their baseline. And then over time they kept track of those utility bills and their emissions, because emissions can be calculated from your utility bills. That's convenient. And they found that they have reduced by 20% over those 3 years. And one interesting thing from this is that the biggest portion of their emissions was from their facilities. In other words, their utility bills, not from transportation staff driving to and from, or from food or other things, but the utilities. And that's where changes to the heating system, the cooling system, and the insulation and air tightness and the ventilation system can have a big effect. We used to have a green sanctuary team here. That was before I was a member, I believe. And I'm hoping that some people here can maybe fill us in on some of the history, but it seems to have gone dormant over the past, I don't know, decade or so. And I know that a lot of energy upgrades were done to this building. We haven't been just doing nothing. So an energy audit, for instance, was done in 2009, and there were a lot of recommendations made in that report, and some of them have been adopted and others have not. So, one interesting thing is I've read recently advice that in order to save a lot of energy, you should install a programmable thermostat. But if you install it and you don't program it, it doesn't do any good. And I don't know when we installed our programmable thermostats, but they weren't programmed until about a month ago. We have replaced a lot of incandescent lights. That was noted in the energy audit report. So that's one of the things that we did do. Water heater insulation is something that we've done recently. That should help. I found a pretty bad air leak around the fresh air intake, which is, if you don't know, it's in the back of the furnace room, which is back behind the kitchen there. And I sealed that up, and it took about an hour. And little things like that can really help a lot. Okay, I believe this is the last page, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, I want to go back to the strategy part. So People's Church of Kalamazoo, they employed a number of strategies to make their plan work. I mean, if you say you're going to go to net zero by 2030 in 10 years, that sounds pretty radical, and that's really a big goal. And a lot of people would say that's not realistic. Well, they did certain things, for instance, spreading out, having a 10-year horizon, a 10-year plan. That's important. Being strategic about which things they do when. So, for instance, knowing that a furnace is going to be probably obsolete in 5 years. Okay, we'll plan to replace that furnace in 5 years. Instead of having a capital campaign and buying a bunch of solar panels, they leased their solar panels with an option to buy later. So it cost them zero upfront to do solar panels, and that was a big part of their immediate reduction. And when I say reduction, it's actually the balance between use of energy and production of energy, if you're producing energy with solar panels. So that counts as a reduction for them. So that's something we could consider. And let's see what other, involving other teams, building and grounds. I mean, obviously, building and grounds has to be intimately involved in these kinds of plan making and decision making. And then the other thing is just making best use of pro bono work and volunteer work and seeking grants. So there's less of a tendency to say, oh, you know, this thing that we want to do, insulating the walls in the RE wing, for instance, is going to cost how many thousands of dollars? Well, we just got to raise all that money from our congregants. Well, maybe we can get some grant money. Maybe we can put some sweat equity into it and do some of that work ourselves. Because I know there are people here who are itching to do that kind of thing. So, I can't think of, okay. Oh, okay, right. Yeah, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Act may provide financial help as well. So, as far as energy efficiency upgrades, insulation and things like that, the only thing that I am aware of in those funding packages is it's called a pilot program, and it sounds not very guaranteed, but there are some things in the area of generating electricity that look a little bit more promising. Production tax credit, for instance, or direct pay as they call it, because we don't pay taxes, so we don't get tax credits. But there's something called direct pay, which is what I call direct pay in lieu of tax credits. It's for nonprofit organizations like churches. So when the bill was crafted, it was intentionally meant to provide opportunities for nonprofits to participate in government funding for improving their energy efficiency. So I'm curious to know from you all where you see us going next on these kinds of issues. And you can just feast your eyes on these images while we're talking about it. Although this mic has a cord, so I don't think it'll reach everybody.
We could use the wireless mic for questions, just so quick.
One thing I was going to say too, I don't know if you guys remember these images up here, but this is from the Smithsonian. They commissioned this artist, Suzanne Duranceau. She's from Montreal, I believe.
Can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
You
Sorry about that. So Suzanne Duranceau is from Montreal, and she was commissioned by the Smithsonian Magazine in 1990 for the 20th anniversary of Earth Day to do these images here. And yeah, I don't know if you guys remember these or is there any recall, but if you look closely, and these aren't the best images, they're pretty provocative actually, and they've kind of stuck with me ever since I first saw these in 1990. But the first one, of course, is a wild planet, which was kind of before humans really took over. The next one is kind of contemporary, where we have a lot of death and destruction. And then the future one, and this is the part I think that's the most controversial, is, well, it's cleaned up, but it's no longer wild, and everything's in nice, neat rows. And so, to me, it's very provocative just in thinking about what is it? What do we want the future to actually look like? Because that probably is the direction we're headed if we just do clean energy and efficiency and not actually think about what's wild and still out there that wants to be. But yes, so that's all.
I had a question about solar panels. Presuming that the technology of solar panels is ever increasing, is that another reason, a good reason to lease rather than buy? And then if you do, if you are done with the previous solar panels, what would happen to those in terms of recycling and ecology?
Well, that's a good point about the technology improving. I guess it would depend on the contract that you have as to whether you could swap out your solar panels when they get to be better technology. They are typically guaranteed for like 25 years. And I know Jack has done a bunch of research on this, so please chime in. But my understanding is that they tend to degrade gradually over time, like maybe 0.5% per year less output. And it's not like at 25 years they're gonna not produce any electricity. So you could have an old solar panel that is still producing 70% of what it did when it was new, when it's 30 or 40 years old. Jack, do you have anything to add on that?
I would just add that Bob Perrin makes the point that in a way, because technology is going to be changing so fast, in a way it's an experiment. And that is, in 25 years, solar panels will look a lot different than the way, and perform a lot different than the way they do now. So leasing may be a better alternative. And I would just say, and Mark add to this, we've done, David Corbin, a former member, reached out to Sherry about applying for an OPPD grant. So we did do 3 solar scenarios, smaller to bigger. And so we've done a lot of research on what solar panels would look like and where they might exist on the building or in the parking lot. So, and to Mark's point, Walt, Mark, and I attended a webinar, if you will, about the Inflation Reduction Act. It'll pay for 1/3 of what our expenditures would be. So the minimal, and then the OPPD grant, and then we've talked about other grants. But the thought was, before we go to the congregation, we need to have some sort of funding plan, of which this, I guess, is an introduction to what we're thinking about right now.
Yeah. And just a point about solar panels, I found a really, I don't know what to call it, exciting website, which is, and you can all do this, and I invite you to do this. Google Project Sunroof. Google Project Sunroof. And you enter your own address, and it will give you in seconds an estimate of how good your house is for solar energy, photovoltaic. Or any address in the United States. So for instance, here's our church building, and it's estimating savings of $600 over 20 years on your electric bills. Okay, obviously this is very rough. What are the assumptions? I don't really know, but it's a very rough kind of estimate. And if you look at the image, there are some bright yellow images, some bright yellow roofs. Ours is not bright yellow, it's more of an orange color, which means it's not the best around. Now, let's go to our sister church. Remember, we're estimated to have $600 in savings over 20 years. Clare Memorial is bright yellow and $2,000 savings over 20 years. Because their roof is flat, it has no shade, it doesn't have a big chimney sticking up out of it, or a steeple. So, that's interesting.
How about if I just shout?
Well, Terry Lynn's got the talking stick right now.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, I would like to know, as far as physical grounds of the church, the surrounding the garden, the off to the east of the building, what can I do as a congregate to help out?
To the east,
Both garden and I know Sharon Conlon takes care of the garden, but to pass it on to our young people and people that can, what can I do as a member?
that's a good question. The first, as I understand it, the property line is just off the wall here. Doesn't go very far, and so that's actually city property on this side. On this side, I don't know if the grounds committee is currently active or not. That's one of the things that I wanted to look into. But one of the things that I have noticed is For instance, and again, as a landscape architect and one, you know, very into, pollinator-friendly plants, I noticed, there was milkweed outside. One of the things that we can do is when we look at native plantings, there's a lot of ornamental plants that are also native to this area. And by native, we're talking about native to here, not necessarily native to California or somewhere else, because there gets to be some debate there too. But using native plants, just as a rule of thumb, is almost always the best bet, because that way you are keeping the local ecology local. We're encouraging the local critters and the local birds. And I can tell you right now, in our yard, we put a native honeysuckle, which we're just right at the edge of where the native honeysuckle grows, and then we had this hybrid honeysuckle from China. And I've watched as the moths and the hummingbirds come, they go up to the one from China, and they back off, and they won't even touch it. And then they go to the native one, and then that's where they feast. And since we planted our yard with all pollinator-friendly species, it is amazing how many butterflies we have now. I mean, regularly we have monarchs and swallowtails and the painted ladies, and when we first moved in, there's none of that. So that's one thing that could be done if we're looking. But I mean, there's a lot of good plants out there already. But I mean, if that's something that the church wants to look at, excuse me, potentially, in terms of upgrading any vegetation and having more, native friendly ones, but.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for your leadership on this. I know that Katrina also helped kind of narrow some things down so that this would be a priority. I was on that committee that made the Church of Green Sanctuary a couple of decades ago, and I think we focused more on, saving paper and recycling and stuff like that, which are good things, and I hope that we redo it. But I was discouraged because I didn't think anybody really cared anymore about this. So your leadership has, brought forth a lot of people, and I'm so thrilled and encouraged to see that there's so many people here who really care about it. And I'm totally in. I'll do anything that needs to be done that I can do.
Thank you. In fact, just to add to that, Elaine, that there are so many different things that we can do. And as you said, there's recycling, composting. For instance, I live just a little less than a mile and a half. How often do I walk to church? Very seldomly. And, that's something that I could do. Each of us can do something personally, but in this particular case, we were looking at anything that we can do in terms of very strictly energy efficiency, and that's kind of this piece. But that said, and Mark and I have talked about this, there are other, branches that when you consider that, when you look at the LEED certification, there are so many different categories. I believe there's about 5 or 6 different categories, and in each of those categories, there's individual elements, and they're very different from one category to the next. And so there are other ways, and so this one, we're just looking very specifically.
Good models already, like the cool congregation thing that we could easily do.
Yeah, it's really important to follow an established program, I think, and follow the lead of that. And this report with the graphs was produced by the Cool Congregations tool. It's a simplified tool that's easy for lay people to use. There is a more comprehensive and complex tool that we can use. It's called Portfolio Manager. It's from EPA. That's more detailed and probably more precise. But just as a rough indicator, and I like rough indicators, as you can tell, this does really display that it's the energy use of the building itself that makes the biggest impact on a church's carbon footprint. Okay. Oliver, can you take that?
Yeah, we'll take it over. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry, I hope that, we used to close the church during the summer. And wonder if we just went to a skeleton crew, no services like in July. We could do things like that. It was just.
Oliver, help get this away from me.
Kaylin?
One thing I think, when you come,
realize what it was like, what your parents said to you when you left the room is turn the lights off, turn the heat down, besides lock the doors. And those kind of things, I think, we can all do and to be responsible for it. Some of us really miss Dave Rosser because he was a champion of doing that. After choir, you turn the heat down. And those are the kind of things. And then your point, during COVID, the church was closed. And so, you know, the amount of energy that was put out for heat and lights and all of that, plus the mimeographing stuff that wasn't done, I don't know. Anyway, those are things to think about, I think. But turn the lights off, folks.
Let's turn the lights up right now, because I
Logan's had
can't
his
see
hand
the
up for a long
visual
time.
up there, because the light is reflecting off of it.
So I think this is really great for the church to move forward on, but I think the carbon footprint is only like one measurement of your sustainability impact. And there's a lot of other areas, including the main ones I think of are water use and waste management. I have ways of improving in the church. And one thing I'd like to support is like moving forward with different vegetation, like moving with, instead of just doing a native lawn of native grasses, you reduce your water consumption, as well as the pollinator species come forward, they like the native plants, but these grasses are also better at carbon sequestering than the lawn that we currently have, so they would be storing more carbon in their deep root systems, unlike the lawn we have currently. And there's a few programs with like waste management that could be incorporated. Like I'm sure there's maybe some recycling here. I haven't seen a bin yet, but Omaha has a kind of unique program called the Hefty Energy Bag Program. If anyone's heard of that.
We're using it.
We're using it? Okay, cool. And then, yeah, we know about that.
And the compost.
Oh, in Concord? Okay. Oh.
I have something. So you guys are the brand new green team, right? The green team, right?
I don't think the green team really exists yet.
Okay, that's what I was gonna ask. So you two, you talked about putting together a green team, and it's right now kind of you two, right?
Yeah, and you know, I'm going to be the president of the board
Okay.
next year, and I really don't have time to lead a team.
All right. Well, I was wondering if we should maybe have everybody put names and emails if we are interested in being a part of a green team. And then, because it sounds to me like we just need a plan, we need to present it to the board, and we need to get it approved, and then we're done,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and I'll start one and pass around. Oh, who's next?
I've only been a member since December, and when you talk about possibly closing the church in the summertime, I want to say this is my home. I came here, I was welcomed by so many people, I feel like I belong, and I feel like it would probably be detrimental to my mental health to have the doors closed. I love coming here and the people, and I think all the nice people in Omaha come here. So I hope we don't have to go to that far. I'm willing to give up air conditioning just to close the doors.
Give up air conditioning.
And real quickly, well, no, but that's actually, that's really good, and touching on the last three comments, actually, I think that's one of the things to think about is, you know, okay, so summertime, maybe we do cut it way down, and again, kind of getting back to what Kaylin was talking about, you know, in the old days, turning off the lights, you know, closing the door. I mean, just think about it, the reason we have those windows upstairs that are operable windows is because that was before the day of air conditioning. So in the summertime, you had to open those windows to let the fresh air in. And again, because of that, we use a lot less energy because we weren't even using it. And when you think about that, how many devices do we have and do we use now that use electricity that maybe we don't need to be using?
Yeah.
I mean, I think about this all the time. I mean, it's great we have these mobile phones, but what happens? You have to plug them in constantly. We didn't have mobile phones before, so maybe we didn't need it. I mean, maybe it really truly is. I mean, think about how many people here have been camping, like truly camping, not just out of the car, but, you know, back in the woods, you know, and you do without when you're camping and you figure out how to make yourself comfortable sometimes simple is better in terms of, how we can do things, so.
So Kaylin mentioned our grandparents. You know, ladies used to carry those little hand fans, and in the summertime, you're fanning yourself. As you're just sitting there listening to the sermon anyway, you might as well fan.
This is a logistical question. Do we have the lights that are left on all night so that they cannot be turned off? I mean, when I go through here, I find lights on, I turn them off, and I don't want to turn anything off.
I walk to my work and back and forth, and I see if this place is lit up like a Christmas tree at night.
Yeah, I mean, it happens. People go downstairs and get something and are into the common room downstairs.
We have motion lights.
And that would be, I think we do not, and that would be one of the improvements, that would be one of the improvements that we could be looking at specifically for that reason, because that is actually a contemporary feature where you walk out of the room and if no one's been in there for 5 minutes, it goes off. I mean, I've wondered about that just with our street lights. I mean, think about it. We put them out there supposedly for safety, and then you look at the picture, the Earth at night, and I mean, anyone's been ever in an airplane, you've flown over the United States at night, it's just like, it's like a beacon. Exactly, at 2 o'clock in the morning when no one is out there. So why is it that our street lights, I mean, not only is it using energy, but it's light pollution, and it disturbs, birds who are migrating at night and things like that. But I mean, if you had a motion detector, so if you are talking about safety, then, at nighttime when no one's moving around, all the lights go off.
Yeah, so we need all your ideas, we need your input, and we need your help.
Putting together a plan and presenting to the board. And
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so we've got the things around.
But I just do want to say, I was curious if anybody knew, like, I'll be like, like I work from late afternoon until very, very early in morning hours, and I'll walk by here at 12:31 in the morning. I'll see the church lit up like a Christmas tree. Now I don't see any cars in the parking lot, which kind of leads me to believe that this isn't some youth group stayover that's going on that night, and it's like day after day. So I want to know, why is the sanctuary is it for safety reasons? So make it appear as though it's or
Certain lights are left on
are.
overnight intentionally, but I don't know which one they
The
are.
one there by that entrance, and then the outdoor lights, and all the other indoor lights should be off.
Okay, so the switches up at that exit are either identified or they are covered, so you can't turn those lights off that are supposed to be on. 'Cause the problem is, I come and I find lights on, I think, is that one of those that's left on intentionally?
Kat has recently changed the room reservation form online, and on it she says, turn all the lights off in the church, which is something I always wondered, what am I supposed to leave on, what I'm not. So she says, turn them all off, the one by the side entrance is the only one, and it stays on, you can't turn it off. And Mark has changed all the programmables, so it goes down to, I think, 53 or 58 at night. So that's really nice, because I use the church a lot, but I had no idea what I was supposed to.
Yeah, so it's
How do you
just
adjust it?
that one by the RE exit.
That's my understanding.
I'll be darned, now I know.
So it's the same way with your grandparents, the best things you probably learned in kindergarten, wash your hands and turn off the lights when you leave. We probably need maybe a reschooling for everyone here at the church. And Caitlin had another question, I believe,
The
too.
light on the outside, and I know that there was a lot of work on that to make the parking lot safe at night.
But those could probably also be motion. In other words, somebody comes, like you do at home, somebody comes into your yard and your lights go on. Instead of being on all night long, we still want to think about safety if people are here. But on the other hand, motion things, if those could be adapted for that, would be something to do.
So I think we have a lot of energy and ideas, and what I can commit to doing is start an email chain, and we can start talking about what we want to see done, and then we can start putting together a plan. But we did promise that this would be done at 12:45, and we're over. So if we could, get your last words in.
Oh, I'll take that back.
Well, this has been great, folks. Hope you got enough to eat and that you're full of good ideas and ready to start making our congregation more green.
Thank you.